So I had the pleasure of visiting people from Neocore Games the other week. These are the folks that make The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing. They were kind enough to show me The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing 3, which of course I will now just refer to as Van Helsing 3. Of course, it's an action RPG in the style of Diablo, but one of the things I think that has made the series stand out, at least a little bit, is storytelling, and not just from a straightforward standpoint, but from an environmental standpoint. Van Helsing 3, of course, takes place in sort of a mythological Eastern European setting, if you will, very dark, very gothic. But what was interesting, of course, is the focus on storytelling in Van Helsing 3 than you might be used to in something like, say, Path of Exile or something in Diablo 3. So Neocore showed me 3 different maps that are going to be in Van Helsing 3. As far as I could tell, they were the beginning of the game, followed by the 2 sequences that come after. And one thing that struck me was such a small thing, but I think a meaningful thing, is just the way they used the camera during cutscenes. Typically in an action RPG, you might see the camera zoom in, and you might see characters speak to each other, and then it will zoom out. In this case, in Van Helsing 3, you saw the camera sway a little bit from further behind, and what that did, and again, it seems like such a small thing, but it made me interested in what was going on. It didn't seem like they were just trying to get the story out of the way to move on to the action. It felt like, this is something that's worth paying attention to, and of course, it is worth paying attention to, in this case, because you have your ghostly companion as well as Van Helsing himself. However, in this case, there's something more to Van Helsing 3. In the past, there were 3 character classes that you could choose from. In the third and final game, you get to choose from 6 classes. The class that I got to see was the Elementalist. And the Elementalist, as you can imagine, is all about elemental magic, with an emphasis on fire. And that came through as I watched Neocore play the game in front of me. For example, one of the biggest spells that I saw time and time again was a wall of fire. And you don't just cast the wall of fire, but you draw it onto the screen. And that was sort of a nice touch that enabled you to determine the trajectory and how you were going to damage enemies. And one of the upgrades for that spell that I saw later were the fire snakes that would emerge from that wall of fire and start spewing orbs of fire at nearby enemies. I saw 3 levels in total. The first was a dungeon area, and it was, in this case, a place that you needed to be so that you could break out a character from the previous games out of his cell. And afterwards, we then went to the hub area. And the hub area works a lot like it did in Van Helsing 2. Van Helsing 2 had a tower defense minigame that you could participate in there. It's not required, but it's something that has returned in Van Helsing 3. However, I didn't get a chance to look at it at all, so I can't say whether or not the tower defense aspect has improved in any way or has had anything meaningful added to it. So the second area I saw was a forest. And it was a traditional action RPG kind of place where you got some monsters that you might have seen before, such as centaurs and the like. So the third area was the most interesting. It was the most otherworldly, sort of a parallel dimension that you have to move through in order to get to the next part of the forest. And in this case, it also gave me a chance to see some of the more unusual enemies and creatures, my favorite of which is one that actually the Elementalist spawns for combat, called Niederhunds. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but in any case, Netherhounds. And of course, they were helpful in addition to the snakes that rose from the flames and spewed fire outwards. And ultimately, after all of this, my takeaway was, hey, Van Helsing looks like another fun action RPG in a series that has already given us 2 fun action RPGs. So yes, I'm looking forward to playing The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing. On the surface, it looks pretty much like a standard action RPG, but I think when it comes to action RPGs, it really comes down to the details. And in this case, it seems like the story details, some of the visual details, and the world details are going to be enough to keep me interested. So stay tuned to GameSpot. I'll give you more information as it comes.